I pressed my back against the couch cushions and stretched my legs out on the worn carpet, the rough fibers scratching against my bare feet. The apartment felt too quiet with Dad gone for his second shift at Murphy's Auto. Just me and the old television humming in the corner, its massive bulk taking up half the entertainment center. Wednesday afternoons dragged when I stayed at Dad's place. The cartoons weren't even good ones. Some ancient show about a cat chasing a mouse through the same house over and over. I picked at a loose thread on my jeans and watched the cat get flattened by an anvil for probably the 100th time since I'd been flipping channels. Dad's apartment was nothing like Mom's house in Lakewood. Everything here looked like it came from a garage sale 10 years ago. The brown couch had a permanent dent where Dad always sat, and the coffee table wobbled if you bumped it wrong. Even the walls seemed tired, painted that boring beige color that made the whole place feel like a waiting room. I was reaching for the remote to change channels when the screen filled with gray static. The sound cut out completely, leaving just that weird buzzing noise old TVs make. I leaned forward and smacked the side of the set, the way Dad always did when it acted up. The static disappeared. The screen went completely black. Then a voice started talking. Not a regular TV announcer voice. This one sounded flat and robotic, like those automated phone messages that tell you your call is important. Emergency alert. All residents in the Cleveland metropolitan area are advised of a dangerous entity currently active in local neighborhoods. Remain indoors until further notice. Do not approach windows or doors. This message will repeat. I stared at the black screen. The voice said the same thing again, word for word, in that same monotone way. My hand found the volume button and I turned it way down, suddenly worried the neighbors might hear. A dangerous entity. What did that even mean? Like a wild animal? A criminal? The message played a third time, and I counted the seconds between repetitions. Exactly 15 seconds of silence, then the robot voice again. The black screen never changed, never showed any emergency broadcast graphics or scrolling text like you see in movies. I pulled my knees up to my chest and wrapped my arms around them. Dad always said this old TV was junk, that it picked up weird signals sometimes from the radio tower across town. Maybe that's all this was, some kind of test broadcast that accidentally got through, but it felt real. The voice didn't sound like a test. It sounded urgent, even through the robotic tone. I stayed put on the carpet, watching the black screen repeat its warning. The apartment felt different now, like the walls were thinner or the silence was deeper. Every small noise, the refrigerator clicking on, footsteps from the apartment upstairs, made me jump. After what felt like hours, regular programming came back on. The cat was getting hit by another anvil, like nothing had happened. I checked the time on the cable box. The alert had lasted exactly 7 minutes. I changed channels, looking for news or anything about an emergency. Cartoons, talk shows, a cooking program. Nothing about any dangerous entity or instructions to stay inside. The local news wasn't on for another 3 hours. When Dad's key turned in the lock that evening, I was still sitting in the same spot on the carpet. He came through the door carrying a bag of takeout Chinese food, his work clothes smelling like motor oil and cigarettes. "You been sitting there all day?" He dropped the bag on the coffee table and looked at the TV. "What's on?" "Dad, did you hear anything about an emergency today? Like on the radio at work or anything?" He opened the food containers and handed me a set of chopsticks. "Emergency? What kind of emergency?" "There was this alert on the TV. It said something dangerous was in the neighborhood and everyone should stay inside." Dad pulled out his phone and started scrolling. His thumb moved fast across the screen, checking news apps and local websites. After a minute, he shook his head. "Nothing here. No alerts, no warnings." He held up the phone to show me a normal news homepage. When did you see this? This afternoon, around 3. The TV went black and this voice started talking about staying away from windows and doors. Dad looked at the television, then back at me. He used his chopsticks to grab some lo mein from the container. This old piece of junk probably picked up some random signal from somewhere. You know how it acts up. He gestured at the TV with his chopsticks. Could have been a test broadcast from another city, or maybe some kind of radio interference. These analog sets are like antennas for all kinds of weird stuff. I nodded and took some rice from the container. Dad's explanation made sense. The TV did weird things all the time. Channels that came in fuzzy, sounds that didn't match the pictures, programs that cut out for no reason. But the voice had been so clear, so specific about Cleveland. Did it seem real to you? Dad asked, watching my face. Yeah, it did. Well, I'm telling you, there was nothing. I would have heard about it at the shop or gotten an alert on my phone or seen it online. He took another bite and pointed the chopsticks at me. Don't let your imagination run wild, okay? This place is safe. I ate my dinner and watched Dad flip through channels, landing on some crime show where detectives were interviewing witnesses. He seemed completely unconcerned about the whole thing, already moving on to tomorrow's plans and whether I'd finished my homework. But something kept nagging at me. The way the voice had repeated the exact same message, the precision of the timing, the complete darkness of the screen. If it was just random interference, wouldn't there have been some variation? Some static or distortion? I accepted Dad's explanation because it was easier than arguing, and because he was the adult who knew how these things worked. But lying in the narrow bed in his spare room that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the alert had been meant for me specifically. That somewhere in Cleveland, something dangerous really was moving through the neighborhoods, and I was the only one who knew about it. I stopped believing Dad's explanation about interference after the third alert. The second one came 5 days later, around the same time in the afternoon. This time, when the screen went black and the robotic voice began, the message was longer. Stay away from windows and doors. Keep lights off during this broadcast. Do not make noise. The dangerous entity is moving through residential areas. Remain in interior rooms until this alert ends. I turned off the lamp next to the couch and sat perfectly still in the dim apartment. The voice repeated its expanded warning 4 times before regular programming returned. 7 minutes exactly, just like before. By the 4th alert, I'd started keeping track. I found an old spiral notebook in Dad's kitchen drawer, the kind he used for grocery lists, and wrote down everything. Date, time, duration, exact words. The pattern became clear after 2 weeks. Every 3 or 4 days, always between 2:30 and 4 p.m., always when I was alone, the instructions grew more detailed each time. Don't look outside, cover reflective surfaces, stay quiet. The entity responds to movement and sound. Each edition made the warnings feel more real, like whoever was broadcasting them had learned something new about this dangerous thing. I started preparing when I heard the static beginning. Lights off first, then I'd grab the notebook and a pencil, positioning myself on the carpet with my back to the windows. The voice would start and I'd write down every word, timing each repetition with the digital clock on the cable box. 3 weeks into this routine, Dad came home early from work. I was sitting in complete darkness when his key turned in the lock, the emergency alert halfway through its cycle. The apartment was black except for the glow from the television screen, which had been showing some kind of weather map with red zones marked across Cleveland. Ethan? What the hell? Dad hit the light switch by the door. The overhead bulb blazed on, making me squint and drop my pencil. On the TV, a cheerful game show host was asking a contestant about her family in Toledo. Why are you sitting in the dark? Dad walked over and felt my forehead with the back of his hand. Are you sick? There was an alert about the entity. I blinked in the sudden brightness, my notebook still open on my lap. It said to keep the lights off. Dad looked at the television, then at me. The game show contestant had just won a trip to Hawaii and was jumping up and down while confetti fell from the ceiling. Alert? He grabbed the remote and started flipping through channels. Local news, cooking shows, afternoon movies. Nothing but normal programming. There's no alert, Ethan. It just ended. Right when you came in. He kept clicking through channels for another minute, then set the remote down hard on the coffee table. The wobble made my pencil roll off onto the carpet. Enough. Dad walked to every lamp in the living room and turned them all on. The apartment blazed with yellow light. These made-up games need to stop. I'm not making it up. I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. I wrote everything down. All the warnings about staying away from windows and show me. My hand shook as I opened the notebook to the first page. Dad read my entries, his expression getting more frustrated with each line. Wednesday, 3:17 p.m. Alert duration 7 minutes. Stay in interior rooms. Entity active in residential areas. Friday, 2:45 p.m. Alert duration 7 minutes. Keep lights off. Cover mirrors and TV screens when not receiving broadcast. Monday, 3:23 p.m. Alert duration 7 minutes. Entity responds to sound and movement. Remain completely still. Dad flipped through all 6 pages of notes, reading the careful timing and word-for-word transcriptions I'd made. When he finished, he closed the notebook and looked at me with tired eyes. This has got to stop. I don't know if you're having bad dreams, or if this is some kind of coping thing because of me and your mom, but it's not real. He held up the notebook. These alerts you're writing about? They don't exist. No buts. This TV is staying on normal channels when you're here alone. And if I come home to find you sitting in the dark again, pretending there's some emergency, we're going to have a serious problem. He walked to the kitchen and started banging around in the cabinets, looking for something to make for dinner. I stayed on the carpet, staring at the bright television screen. The game show had ended, and now there was a commercial for laundry detergent. Dad didn't give me back the notebook. When the weekend came, I tried explaining everything to Mom while we made grilled cheese sandwiches in her kitchen. Her house in Lakewood always smelled like the vanilla candles she burned in the living room, and the afternoon light coming through her clean windows made everything feel safer than Dad's apartment. So these alerts happen every few days? Mom flipped my sandwich in the pan, the butter sizzling against the bread. And they tell you to hide? Not hide exactly. Just stay away from windows and keep quiet. There's something dangerous moving around the neighborhoods. She was quiet for a minute, concentrating on getting the cheese melted just right. When she put the sandwich on my plate, she sat down across from me at the small kitchen table. Ethan, I know this whole situation with your dad and me has been hard. Moving between 2 homes, feeling like everything's different. She reached over and smoothed down a piece of my hair that was sticking up. Sometimes when kids are stressed about big changes, their minds create stories to help them feel more in control. I took a bite of the sandwich. The cheese was perfectly gooey, the way she always made it. It's not a story. The voice is real. I believe that it feels real to you. But honey, if there were actual emergency alerts happening in Cleveland, I would know about them. I'd get notifications on my phone or hear about it at work or see it on the news. She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. Look, no emergency alerts. No warnings about staying inside or avoiding windows. Maybe they only broadcast on old TVs. Dad's TV is really old. Mom took a small bite of her own sandwich, thinking. "Ethan, I want you to talk to Mrs. Henderson at school. She's a counselor, and she helps kids work through difficult feelings." "I don't have difficult feelings." "Living between two homes, watching your parents adjust to being separated. That's a lot for anyone to handle. And sometimes our brains try to make sense of confusing situations by creating explanations that feel more manageable than the real problem." I finished my sandwich without arguing. Mom meant well, but she was doing the same thing Dad did, explaining away something she hadn't experienced herself. Neither of them had heard the robotic voice giving increasingly specific warnings about a dangerous entity. Neither of them had felt the way the apartment changed during those 7-minute alerts, like the walls got thinner and the silence got deeper. That night, lying in my old bed in Mom's house, I decided to keep tracking the alerts myself. Dad had taken my notebook, but I could remember most of the details, the timing, the progression of warnings, the exact duration. Something was happening in Cleveland, something the adults couldn't see or hear, but I was going to figure out what it was, even if I had to do it alone. The next alert would come on Tuesday or Wednesday, sometime in the afternoon. I'd be ready for it. I'd counted 23 alerts by the time the warning changed. The afternoon felt like all the others. Dad at work, me stretched across the brown couch, the old TV cycling through its usual lineup of tired cartoons. I'd given up trying to convince anyone the alerts were real. Dad had made that clear when he took my notebook, and Mom kept steering conversations toward counselors and coping mechanisms. But I kept mental notes anyway. Tuesday, October 15th, 3:18 in the afternoon when the static started. I turned the volume down out of habit and settled into my usual position on the carpet, back to the windows. The screen went black, and the familiar robotic voice began. "Emergency alert. All residents in the Cleveland metropolitan area are advised of a dangerous entity currently active in local neighborhoods. Remain indoors until further notice. Do not approach windows or doors. Do not respond to anyone outside, even if they claim to be family or emergency services. This message will repeat." My spine went cold. That was new. The voice continued with its standard warnings about staying in interior rooms and keeping quiet, but the addition about family and emergency services played again with each repetition. Don't respond to anyone outside, even if they claim to be family or emergency services. Why would someone pretending to be family try to get inside? What could mimic a person's voice well enough to fool someone? I pulled my knees to my chest and counted the repetitions. 4 times, then silence. The familiar 7-minute cycle ticking by on the cable box. 5 minutes and 30 seconds into the alert, I heard footsteps outside. They moved quickly across the parking lot, the rhythm uneven like someone running but trying not to make noise. The steps stopped directly in front of Dad's door. "Ethan?" My mother's voice, breathless and shaking. "Ethan, please, I need you to open the door. Something's wrong, and I need help." I stayed frozen on the carpet. Mom sounded terrified, her words coming out in rushed bursts like she was crying or trying not to scream. But the robotic voice on the television had just finished repeating its warning about not responding to anyone outside. "Please, honey, I know you're in there. Your dad called me and said there was an emergency. I drove straight here." Her voice broke on the last word. "Ethan, I'm scared. Please, let me in." My hand found the remote and I muted the television completely. Mom's voice became clearer through the door, and she really did sound like she was crying. The way her voice cracked when she said my name. That was exactly how she sounded when she got overwhelmed, like the time she found out Dad was moving out. I stood up, my legs shaky, and took a step toward the front door. "I can hear you moving around in there. Please, just unlock the door. We need to leave right now. Another step. The deadbolt was 3 feet away, a simple turn of my wrist. The television volume suddenly increased, even though I'd muted it. The robotic voice filled the apartment. Do not respond to anyone outside, even if they claim to be family or emergency services. I jerked backward like I'd been slapped. Ethan? Mom's voice again, but there was something off about it now. The crying had stopped too abruptly, and her tone sounded flatter. Still her voice, but wrong somehow. Why aren't you answering me? I backed away from the door until I hit the couch. The television repeated its warning about not responding to anyone outside. 6 minutes and 15 seconds on the cable box. I know you can hear me. The voice outside wasn't crying anymore. It sounded patient now, almost conversational. Your father told me about the games you've been playing, about the alerts you think you're receiving. Games. Mom had never called them games. She always said stories or feelings, never games. Open the door, Ethan. We need to discuss this behavior. The voice was definitely Mom's, but the words felt wrong, too formal. She didn't talk to me like a teacher giving a lecture. 7 minutes exactly. The television screen filled with bright colors as regular programming returned. A cooking show where someone was explaining how to properly fold dumplings. The voice outside stopped. I waited 5 more minutes before moving away from the couch. No more footsteps in the parking lot. No sounds at all, except the normal afternoon noise of traffic and someone's dog barking 3 buildings over. When I finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole, the hallway was empty. That evening, I called Mom from Dad's kitchen phone while he was in the shower. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and normal. Hi, honey, how was your day? Mom, were you at Dad's apartment this afternoon? What? No, I was at work until 5:30. Why would I be at your father's place? You didn't come by around 3:20? You didn't knock on the door? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted to that careful way adults use when they think you're lying. Ethan, I was in meetings all afternoon. I have my calendar right here if you want me to read it to you. Another pause. Why would you think I came by? I heard your voice outside the door. You sounded upset and said Dad called about an emergency. Your father didn't call me about anything, and I certainly wasn't at his apartment building. Her voice got sharper. Ethan, what's really going on here? I held the phone against my ear and stared at the kitchen tiles. How could I explain that her voice had been outside the door, pleading and crying, and then turning strange? How could I tell her about the warning not to respond to family members when she already thought I was making everything up? Nothing. I guess I just thought I heard something. These stories are getting out of hand. First the emergency alerts. Now you think I'm showing up places I've never been. She took a deep breath. I think we really need to talk about getting you some help processing all these changes. I'm fine, Mom. No, you're not fine, and that's okay. But these elaborate scenarios you're creating, they're not helping you cope. They're making things worse. I hung up without saying goodbye. Dad came out of the bathroom in his robe, his hair still wet from the shower. He looked at me standing by the kitchen phone and frowned. Who were you talking to? Mom. Everything okay? I nodded and walked back to the living room. The cooking show was still on. Someone now demonstrating knife techniques for chopping vegetables. Normal, harmless television that didn't warn anyone about dangerous entities or voices that pretended to be your mother. Dad followed me and sat in his usual spot on the couch, making the cushions sag. Ethan, I need you to listen to me. He picked up the remote and turned off the TV completely. Your mom called earlier and told me about some of the things you've been saying to her, about emergency alerts and now thinking she came by here today. I stared at the blank television screen. These stories have got to stop. I don't know if you're doing this for attention or if you're genuinely confused about what's real and what isn't. But either way, it ends now. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If I hear about one more made-up emergency or fake alert, I'm getting rid of this TV entirely. No more cartoons, no more anything. Do you understand? Yes. Good. And if your mother calls tomorrow asking if you've been imagining voices or making up more stories about her being places she wasn't, we're going to have a much longer conversation about what happens to kids who can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy. He turned the television back on and flipped to a baseball game. The announcers were discussing batting averages and trade possibilities, their voices filling the apartment with comfortable, predictable noise. I went to bed early that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about the voice outside the door. It had been Mom's voice exactly. The same pitch, the same slight rasp she got when she was tired. But something about the words, the way she'd called my behavior games, the formal tone when she'd said we needed to discuss things, and the timing. 20 minutes after an alert that specifically warned about not responding to people claiming to be family. Lying in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was completely alone with this. Neither parent believed me. Both thought I was making everything up. And now Dad was threatening to take away the only way I had of receiving the warnings. But the alerts would keep coming. Every 3 or 4 days, right on schedule, telling me about the dangerous entity moving through neighborhoods. And now I knew that entity could sound exactly like someone I loved. The figures appeared during the 24th alert. I'd positioned myself in my usual spot on the carpet when the static began. Back to the windows, volume turned down low. The screen went black and the robotic voice started its familiar warnings about staying away from windows and doors. But this time, when I glanced toward the sliding glass door that led to Dad's small balcony, I saw them. 3 dark shapes stood perfectly still on the concrete outside. Not moving, not making any sound. Just standing there like they were waiting for something. The figures were tall, maybe adult height, but their details were impossible to make out through the glass. They looked more like shadows than people, except shadows didn't stand upright when there was nothing to cast them. My breathing went shallow. The alert voice continued its cycle about remaining in interior rooms while the entity was active, but now I understood why. The dangerous thing wasn't some abstract threat moving through neighborhoods. It was right outside Dad's apartment, watching. I forced myself to stay still until the 7 minutes ended and regular programming returned. A game show filled the screen with bright colors and applause. When I looked back at the sliding door, the balcony was empty. Dad's old camera sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it after looking through vacation photos last weekend. The next time an alert came, Thursday afternoon while Dad was at Murphy's, I was ready. The figures appeared again during the 4th repetition of the warning message. This time, there were 4 of them, arranged across the balcony in a line. I grabbed the camera and crept toward the sliding door, staying low and keeping the volume muted on the television. Through the viewfinder, they looked even stranger. Tall and completely motionless, like mannequins someone had positioned outside and forgotten. I snapped 3 pictures, the camera's flash reflecting off the glass door. The moment the alert ended and cartoons returned, they vanished. I developed the film at the 1-hour photo place near Dad's work that Saturday, telling the clerk I was working on a school project. When I picked up the prints, my hands shook as I flipped through them. Empty balcony, empty concrete, empty railing with nothing beyond it but the parking lot and other apartment buildings. The photos showed exactly what Dad would see if he looked out those windows. Absolutely nothing unusual. But I'd seen them standing there, counted 4 distinct shapes arranged in perfect spacing across the narrow balcony. Sunday dinner at Mom's house in Lakewood gave me another chance to try explaining what was happening. She'd made pot roast, my favorite, and the kitchen smelled like herbs and comfort. Her dining room always felt safer than Dad's apartment, with clean windows that let in actual daylight and furniture that matched. The figures only show up during the alerts, I said, cutting my roast into smaller pieces. They stand perfectly still for exactly 7 minutes, then they're gone. Mom set down her fork and looked at me with that expression she got when she was trying to be patient. Ethan, honey, we've talked about this. These emergency alerts you think you're hearing, they're not real. But now I'm seeing things too, during the broadcasts. That's what worries me. She reached across the table and touched my hand. When someone starts having both auditory and visual experiences that no one else can confirm, that's usually a sign they're under a lot of stress. I pulled my hand back. I took pictures. They don't show up in photos, but I saw them. Of course they don't show up in photos because they're not actually there. Her voice got gentler, the way it did when she thought I was upset. Ethan, I think you're creating these stories because you feel responsible for your dad and me separating. Kids often blame themselves when their parents split up. And sometimes that guilt manifests as elaborate scenarios. I don't feel guilty. Maybe not consciously. But your mind might be trying to create an external threat, something dangerous that requires you to stay alert and vigilant, because dealing with that feels easier than processing the real changes happening in our family. I finished my pot roast without arguing. Mom meant well, but she was doing what adults always did, explaining away anything that didn't fit their understanding of how the world worked. She couldn't hear the alerts, couldn't see the figures. So obviously I was making everything up. When Dad got home from work Monday evening, I tried showing him the photos. Look, I know they don't show anything, but I saw figures standing on the balcony during the alert. 4 of them, all perfectly still. Dad barely glanced at the prints before handing them back. He sat heavily on the couch, still wearing his work clothes that smelled like motor oil and cigarettes. Ethan, this has gone far enough. First it was voices on the TV giving you emergency warnings. Then you thought your mother came to the door when she was at work. Now you're taking pictures of things that don't exist. He rubbed his face with both hands. I can't keep dealing with this. But no, listen to me. His voice got harder. I work 10 hours a day trying to keep this place running and food on the table. I don't have time to manage whatever game you're playing or whatever cry for attention this is supposed to be. It's not a game. Then what is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're making up increasingly elaborate stories to get a reaction out of me and your mother. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And if this behavior doesn't stop immediately, you're going to live with Sarah full-time. No more splitting weeks between houses. You can be her problem to figure out. The threat hit me like cold water. Living with Mom permanently meant escaping whatever was happening at Dad's apartment, but it also meant admitting defeat, accepting that no one would ever believe me about the alerts or the figures or the voice that sounded exactly like Mom. I'm not making it up. Then prove it. Next time you think you see these figures, call me at work. Get me on the phone and tell me exactly what you're seeing while you're seeing it. Dad stood up and walked to the kitchen. But when I come home and find nothing there, when you can't produce any evidence that anyone else can verify, this conversation ends. You go live with your mother, and I don't want to hear another word about emergency alerts or dangerous entities. 3 days later, when I called Mom to talk about something normal, homework maybe, or what she was making for dinner, she asked me a question that changed everything. "Ethan, how would you feel about living here full-time instead of going back and forth between my house and your dad's?" I was sitting at her kitchen table, the same one where we'd had grilled cheese sandwiches and she'd explained about stress creating stories. Afternoon light came through her clean windows, making everything look warm and safe. "You mean not staying at Dad's apartment anymore?" "That's right. You'd have your old room back permanently, go to the school here in Lakewood, have all your things in one place." She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "I've been thinking about our conversations, about how stressed you seem lately. Maybe all this back and forth is making it harder for you to feel settled." Relief flooded through me so fast it made me dizzy. No more alerts, no more robotic voice warnings, no more dark figures standing motionless on the balcony. No more sleeping in Dad's spare room while something dangerous moved through Cleveland neighborhoods. "Yes, I want to live here." Mom smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in weeks. "I thought you might. I'll talk to your father about the arrangement. It might take a week or two to work out the details, but I think this will be better for everyone." "When can I move my stuff?" "Soon, honey. Very soon." That night, lying in my old bed in Mom's house, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time since the alert started. Whatever was happening at Dad's apartment building, whatever those figures were doing during the 7-minute broadcasts, I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. Mom was right about one thing. I did feel guilty about their separation, but not because I blamed myself for their problems. I felt guilty because I was relieved to be escaping, leaving Dad alone in that shabby apartment with its old television and whatever watched from the balcony. But I was 12 years old, and I'd spent weeks trying to convince adults that something dangerous was happening while they explained away everything I experienced. If living with Mom meant safety, meant normal afternoons without emergency broadcasts, and figures that vanished from photographs, then I'd take that deal. I could learn to live with the guilt. I called Mom the next morning while Dad was at work, using the kitchen phone with its long cord that barely reached to the living room. "I want to move my stuff today," I said when she picked up. "I'm ready." There was a pause, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. She was probably at her office, dealing with whatever kept her busy during the day. "Today? Ethan, I thought we agreed it would take a week or two to work everything out with your father. I already packed most of my things. It's just clothes and some books." I wound the phone cord around my finger, watching it turn white. "Dad said I could go live with you if I wanted to. He won't care if I leave early." "Honey, this isn't something we can rush. There are arrangements to make, conversations to have. Please, Mom, I just want to come home." The words slipped out before I could stop it. Home. Not Mom's house or the place in Lakewood, but home. Dad's apartment had never felt like that, with its saggy couch and temperamental television and the constant feeling that something was watching from outside. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice got softer. "Of course you want to come home. I'll pick you up this afternoon, okay? We'll figure out the details later." "What time?" "Around 4:30, after I finish up here. Pack whatever you need for now, and we can get the rest of your things another day." I hung up and spent the rest of the morning pulling clothes from the small dresser in Dad's spare room. Everything fit into one duffel bag. T-shirts, jeans, underwear, the 3 books I'd brought from Mom's house weeks ago. The room looked exactly the same when I finished, like I'd never lived there at all. The afternoon dragged by with game shows and soap operas filling the silence. I kept checking the cable box clock, watching the minutes crawl toward 4:30. Every few minutes I'd look toward the sliding glass door, but the balcony stayed empty. No alerts, no static, no robotic voice warnings. Just normal television and the distant sound of traffic in the parking lot. At 4:15, the television turned itself on. I'd been sitting on the couch, duffel bag at my feet, waiting for Mom's car to appear in the parking lot. The TV had been off for the past hour, the screen completely black. Then the familiar static filled the speakers, but louder than usual, almost harsh. The screen stayed dark for longer than normal. 10 seconds. 15. 20. When the robotic voice finally spoke, the words were different. Emergency alert. Immediate evacuation required. The entity has breached interior defenses. All residents must leave the building immediately. Do not remain indoors. Exit through primary entrances only. The danger is no longer outside. My blood went cold. Leave the building? For weeks, every single alert had warned me to stay inside, to keep away from windows and doors, to remain in interior rooms. Now it was telling me the opposite. Repeat. Immediate evacuation required. The entity is now inside the building. Exit immediately through primary entrances. Do not use elevators or rear exits. Time is critical. I stood up, legs shaky, and grabbed my duffel bag. The voice sounded more urgent than it ever had, the mechanical tone somehow conveying panic. But this could be another test, another way the thing outside was trying to trick me into leaving the safety of the apartment. Through the sliding glass door, I could see the balcony was no longer empty. Dark figures stood there, but not just 3 or 4 like before. They covered the entire concrete space, packed shoulder to shoulder, all facing the glass. More figures filled the balconies above and below, and when I moved to the front window, I saw them surrounding the entire building like a fence. Evacuation window closing in 60 seconds. Exit immediately. The entity has compromised internal areas. Remaining indoors will result in contact. Contact. The word sent ice through my chest. Contact with what? The robotic voice had never been this specific about consequences before. 50 seconds. I could count them down on the cable box as the alert continued its new warning. The dark figures outside pressed closer to the windows, still perfectly motionless, but somehow more present than before. 30 seconds. Exit through primary entrance immediately. Entity has reached residential floors. I took a step toward the front door, then stopped. This was exactly what the thing would want, to drive me outside where the figures were waiting. But what if the voice was right? What if something really had gotten inside the building, and staying here meant being trapped with it? Car doors slammed in the parking lot. I ran to the front window and saw Mom's blue sedan, engine still running. She was already out of the car, walking quickly toward the building entrance with her purse clutched against her side. 10 seconds. Exit immediately or contact is inevitable. Mom's footsteps echoed in the stairwell, climbing fast. She never ran up those stairs. Always took her time because she said 3 flights were enough exercise for one day. But now she was moving like something was chasing her. Her knock came exactly when the television voice stopped. Rapid, urgent knocking that didn't sound like her normal patient tapping. "Ethan, are you ready? We need to go right now." I grabbed my duffel bag and moved toward the door. Her voice sounded wrong, breathless and strained, like she'd been running for much longer than 3 flights of stairs. "Ethan, please hurry. Get your things and come with me." The television behind me was still broadcasting, but the alert had changed again. Now it was just repeating, "Contact initiated, exit impossible. Contact initiated, exit impossible." I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Mom stood in the hallway, but something about her looked off. Her hair was messier than usual, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Her eyes kept darting toward the stairwell behind her. "Are you packed? We need to leave immediately." "Yeah, I'm ready." I stepped into the hallway with my bag. "Mom, are you okay?" "Everything's fine now, but we have to go. Right now." She turned and started down the stairs without waiting for me to lock the door. I followed, hearing the television's voice echoing from the open apartment. "Contact initiated. Contact initiated. Contact initiated." The stairwell felt different as we descended. Darker, even though the fluorescent lights were working. Our footsteps seemed to echo too much, bouncing off the concrete walls in ways that didn't make sense. Mom moved quickly ahead of me, taking the steps 2 at a time. "Mom, slow down." "We can't slow down. We have to reach the car." Her voice carried that same strained quality, like she was trying not to panic but wasn't entirely succeeding. When we reached the second-floor landing, I caught a glimpse of her face in the stairwell light. Her expression looked focused and determined, but also somehow blank, like she was concentrating very hard on something I couldn't see. The ground floor exit appeared ahead of us, late afternoon daylight streaming through the glass doors. Mom pushed through first, holding the door open for me. "Hurry, Ethan." I stepped outside and immediately felt exposed. The dark figures I'd seen from the window were gone, but the parking lot felt wrong, too quiet for 4:30 on a weekday afternoon. Mom's car sat exactly where she'd left it, engine running, driver's door still open. "Get in the car. Put your bag in the back seat." I threw my duffel bag behind the passenger seat and climbed in. Mom was already behind the wheel, putting the car in reverse before I'd even closed my door. As we backed out of the parking space, I could hear the television in Dad's apartment still broadcasting through the open door we'd left behind. The robotic voice carried across the parking lot, repeating its warning about contact being initiated, growing fainter as Mom accelerated toward the street. Sarah drove faster than usual through the residential streets, taking corners without her typical caution. I watched familiar neighborhood houses blur past the passenger window. Small ranch homes with chain-link fences and overgrown lawns that looked exactly like the area around Dad's building. "Mom, are you okay?" "Everything's fine now." Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white against the worn plastic. She kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, but not the way she normally did when driving. These were quick, darting glances, like she expected to see something following us. "You seem upset." "Everything's fine now. We're safe." The same phrase, delivered in the exact same tone. I'd heard Mom repeat herself before when she was distracted or thinking about work, but this felt different. More automatic, like she was reading from a script. We passed through the intersection where Woodland Avenue met the main road toward Lakewood. I'd made this drive dozens of times over the past few months, moving between Dad's apartment and Mom's house, but today the route felt unfamiliar. The street seemed too empty for late afternoon, with no kids playing in yards or people walking dogs. "Mom, why were you in such a hurry to leave?" "Everything's fine now. You're safe." I turned to look at her more carefully. Her profile looked normal. The same nose, same chin, same auburn hair pulled back in its usual ponytail. But something about her expression seemed fixed, like she was concentrating very hard on maintaining the right facial features. The highway on-ramp appeared ahead, marked by a green sign that read, I-90 West, Lakewood. Mom accelerated up the ramp without slowing down, merging into traffic with the kind of aggressive driving she always criticized other people for doing. I'd been watching the speedometer climb past 65 when movement in the side mirror caught my attention. Dad's apartment building was still visible in the distance, 3 stories of red brick surrounded by smaller houses and empty lots. Most of the windows reflected afternoon sunlight, making them look like blank gold squares, except for one window on the 3rd floor. Dad's living room window was dark, and someone stood behind the glass. A figure that looked exactly like me. Same height, same brown hair, same green t-shirt I'd been wearing when we left the apartment. The figure stood perfectly still, facing our direction, arms at its sides. As our car moved farther away, the figure in the window raised one hand in a slow, deliberate wave. My breath caught in my throat. The gesture looked wrong, too controlled and careful, like someone imitating how they thought a 12-year-old boy would wave. The figure's expression was impossible to make out from this distance, but something about its posture made my skin crawl. "Mom!" I grabbed her arm, pointing frantically toward the apartment building. "Look in the mirror. Look at Dad's window." She glanced in the rearview mirror for maybe half a second, then returned her attention to the highway ahead. "I don't see anything unusual." "There's someone in the window. Someone who looks exactly like me. Everything's fine now. You're safe." The same mechanical response, delivered without any change in her tone or facial expression. She didn't ask what I meant about someone looking like me, didn't express concern or confusion, didn't even slow down to get a better look. I twisted in my seat to stare back through the rear window. The apartment building had shrunk to a small rectangle in the distance, but I could still make out the dark window where the figure stood. It hadn't moved from its position, still facing our direction like it was watching us drive away. "Mom, please look. Just turn around and look. Everything's fine now." Her voice had taken on that same flat, robotic quality I'd been hearing through the television for weeks. The exact same inflection, the same measured pace. When I looked at her profile again, her lips barely moved when she spoke, like the words were coming from somewhere else. The radio crackled to life without anyone touching the controls. Static filled the car, harsh and sudden, making me jump in my seat. Through the interference, a familiar voice began speaking, the same robotic tone I'd been listening to during every emergency alert. "Attention residents of the Cleveland metropolitan area. The dangerous entity has successfully infiltrated local households. Previous warnings regarding outdoor threats are no longer applicable. The entity now operates from within residential structures. Residents who have evacuated their homes should be advised that the threat has followed them to secondary locations." I reached for the radio knob to turn it off, but Mom's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist before I could touch it. "Don't." Her grip was too strong, fingers pressing into my skin hard enough to leave marks. She'd never grabbed me like that before, never used that tone of voice with me. The radio continued its broadcast. The entity demonstrates the ability to mimic familiar individuals with complete accuracy. Residents should not trust family members who exhibit unusual behavior patterns or request immediate relocation. The danger is no longer external. I tried to pull my hand away, but Mom's fingers tightened. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, but her mouth moved slightly, like she was mouthing the words along with the radio broadcast. "Evacuation efforts have been compromised. Secondary locations are not secure. The entity has successfully integrated into family units. Trust no one. Remain vigilant. This message will repeat." The static faded, and normal music began playing. Some oldies station Mom liked, with a cheerful song about summer vacation. She released my wrist and returned both hands to the steering wheel. "Everything's fine now. You're safe." I rubbed the red marks her fingers had left on my skin and looked back toward Cleveland one more time. Dad's apartment building was no longer visible, hidden behind trees and other buildings. But somewhere in that third-floor window, something that looked exactly like me was probably still standing there, watching the empty highway. The radio played its upbeat song while Mom drove toward Lakewood, humming along under her breath. Everything about the car seemed normal, except for the 5 finger-shaped bruises forming on my wrist. and the way her humming sounded exactly like the robotic voice from the emergency alerts.